We're at the home stretch of the 2019 college football playoff race as we enter week 11 of the season. Major college football playoff implications are on the line this weekend as we've got 10 more good matchups to predict this week, including not only the game of the week, but the game of the year, number 1 LSU and number 2 Alabama. Of course, these are just the Associated Press rankings, and whatever the college football playoff committee decides to do as far as rankings are concerned are now going to be the rankings that are going to mean more. So no matter what happens with the rankings, this will still be the game of the year because the winner of this game will potentially be a lock for the college football playoff, whether or not they win or lose the SEC championship game, as long as they take care of their business beforehand. So before we get to my week 11 picks, I do want to go over my top 10, but I'm going to do this very quickly this week. That way this doesn't run over a half hour. So this is going to be quick because the top 5, they all had a bye week last week. So the top 5 all remains the same with LSU 1, Ohio State 2, Alabama 3, Penn State 4, and Clemson 5. The real rankings this week, where it really got shuffled, it didn't really get shuffled much. Georgia went at number 6, and then everybody else just moved up a spot. So Georgia at 6, I think right now is the best one-loss team in college football, because right now I think Georgia has a little bit better of a resume than Oregon does right now. But you can easily argue for either of those teams to be number 6 right now. Baylor at number 8, they did have a scare against West Virginia, but despite having a performance like that, I can't put them behind a one-loss Oklahoma team or a one-loss Utah team. And simply Oklahoma at 9 and 10. Utah, I think they had a productive win this week on the road at Washington. Even though the Huskies, they're an unranked opponent, and it may not matter as much as far as resume points are concerned. But it's a tough place to play. And Washington has had Utah's number in recent memory. So that's a huge win for the Utes as I put them in my top 10. Oklahoma at 9 because Oklahoma, I'm giving them the benefit of having their better loss, like the better loss. Oklahoma's one loss is better than Utah's one loss. So that is the top 10. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to do a reaction to the first playoff committee ranking tomorrow night. I might, but no promises though. Don't count on it. But if I do one on the ranking reaction, I'll go over some scenarios that we could see play out over the next upcoming weeks. So it's going to be a fight for the finish. Let's get to the Week 11 college football predictions. So first matchup this week, number 11 Baylor, who I have at number 8, of course, versus TCU. Now, I find this possibly a trap game for the Bears. Because the Big 12, it's kind of up and down. Like 1 minute, a team in the Big 12 pulls off an upset. The next week, they tend to go back to normality of mediocrity. And I don't know what to expect out of TCU. 1 week, they beat Texas, and the next week, they lost Oklahoma State. So based off of patterns, you would expect me to pick TCU to pull off the upset. But I'm not. I'm going to pick Baylor, but I won't be surprised at the very least if TCU does pull off this upset, because I think this is a trap game for Baylor. But like I've always said throughout this season, sometimes it's just about survive and advance, and I think Baylor will do that. They survived and advanced last week, and I'll think they'll survive and advance again. I'm going to take the Baylor Bears, but not by much. I'm going to say it's going to be a one-possession game. Next, we have number 20 Kansas State versus Texas. And last week, Kansas State, they beat up on Kansas to move Kansas State into the top 20. So as far as Oklahoma's playoff chances are concerned, I'll probably say this again tomorrow if I do my scenarios on that first ranking. But I think Oklahoma's best interest is to have Kansas State win this, because their one loss will look better and better. Well, really not necessarily better, but it will look more respectable if Kansas State were to end up winning out and found their way into the top 15 or top 13 or 12 or wherever the Wildcats can get to. But unfortunately, I am going to pick the Longhorns in this one. I think that Texas will be able to stop Kansas State's running game, because the big weakness for Texas is the passing game. And as far as Kansas State football is concerned this season, it's been more about the running game. So I think if Texas stops the Wildcats' running game, I think it's going to be a long game for the Wildcats. So I'm going to take the Longhorns to pull off the upset, because lately I've been predicting a lot of upsets, because we're in that month of November where any team can fall at any point. So with the two predictions so far, I have Baylor surviving a close one, and I have Texas pulling off an upset against Kansas State. But the question is, who would Oklahoma benefit from winning more? That's the big question. But I'm going to take Texas in this one. I'll talk more about it tomorrow if I do a video on this. Next, we've got number 22 Wake Forest and Virginia Tech. The Hokies, they hung in there with Notre Dame from start to finish. They just lost at the very end. Well, Wake Forest is a top 25 team and possibly the last chance to stop Clemson from easily advancing to the college football playoff. But I think Wake Forest will win this one. I think this can go either way, because I think Virginia Tech, they're going to play their hearts out because they felt like they should have gotten that upset against Notre Dame. They had it, but they just lost at the very end. So I'm going to take Wake Forest, as I think that heartbreaking loss last week for the Hokies, I think it's still weighing on their minds. I'm going to take Wake Forest, but I think it won't be that much. I think Wake Forest wins this in a shootout. I'm going to say a last-second field goal to win the game 41-38 with about 34 seconds left. I think it's going to be that type of a game. Next, we have Missouri and number 6, Georgia. Georgia is right now looking like the best one-loss team in college football. But it is November, and any team can lose at any time. And Missouri, I feel like they're not as bad as a team as their record might show. But they have losses to Vanderbilt and Wyoming. Now, Wyoming's not that bad of a team, though. We're going to talk about Wyoming a little bit later. But losing to Vanderbilt, I think that makes Missouri a little bit overrated. But I could see Missouri having a good chance of beating Florida later on in the season. But I think the Bulldogs win this one, because I think the Bulldogs, they had their mulligan pretty early in the season. And right now, I think the Bulldogs, they do control their own destiny. They had a convincing win against the Gators last week in Jacksonville. So they control their own destiny in the SEC East and possibly their own destiny for the college football playoff. Because if Georgia wins out, they're going to be one of the 4 teams in. It really doesn't matter who's going to be undefeated after that. I think Georgia will end up being the best one-loss team in college football. So if Georgia wins out, they're going to be in. Next, a game I didn't think. Yeah, and I'm going to take Georgia in this one. Not by a lot. I'm going to say Georgia by less than 14 points. I'm still not sold on that offense yet. I just think their offense, I feel like it's getting there at this point. But they're going to need an offense if they're going to want to make it to the college football playoff. Next, a matchup I didn't think I was going to end up predicting. Appalachian State and South Carolina. Appalachian State, heartbreaking loss last week to Georgia Southern, ultimately ending their chances of a bid to a New Year's Six. While South Carolina, they've had an up and down season. One week they pull off an upset against Georgia, then weeks later they end up losing to Tennessee. They struggle against Vanderbilt, but they end up taking care of business as the game progressed. So this, I think, will surprisingly be a blowout in favor of the Gamecocks, because this is going to be the strongest competition that Appalachian State is going to face this season. And I think South Carolina, I do think it's possible that Will Muschamp is on the hot seat at this point, which we'll get into some other head coaching news a little bit later at the end. So I'm going to take the Gamecocks to win this matchup. I think it's going to be a blowout in favor of the Gamecocks because they still have some season left. They can still make it to a bowl game. They can still have a postseason. Appalachian State can as well. But what will Appalachian State's mentality be? I'm interested to see that. I'm going to take South Carolina. Next, we have Iowa State and number 9 Oklahoma. Oklahoma coming off a bye week, recovering from their upset loss against Kansas State. And the last time these two teams played each other in Norman, Iowa State pulled off the upset against Oklahoma, giving them their only loss of that regular season, which eventually led to Oklahoma losing to Georgia in the Rose Bowl in the best college football playoff game of all time, at least in the semifinal round. But I'm going to take Oklahoma in this one because Oklahoma's a lot like Georgia. I think Oklahoma, potentially, they control their own destiny depending on what happens around them with the matchups that are going to get played in the coming weeks. So I think Oklahoma, they had their mulligan, and now they have to win out from here. And I think the Sooners will do that. Because despite losing to Kansas State a couple of weeks ago, I think Oklahoma will be just fine. Although I knew that it was going to be tough for Jalen Hurts to put up 45 points every single week, I think Oklahoma's going to... They could have some problems with Iowa State because Iowa State's one of those sneaky teams that can pull off a late season upset. But I just can't see it this week. I think Oklahoma, they now know what they need to do to get to the college football playoff. I'm going to take the Sooners. I think the Sooners are going to be just fine. Next, we have Wyoming and Boise State. Now, Wyoming, they are not as bad as a team as their record is showing, because they have a close loss to San Diego State. They have a close loss to Tulsa. Tulsa should have beaten Memphis and SMU. So Tulsa possibly could have 2 more wins to their record. So Wyoming's not that bad of a team either. They're not a pushover. And Boise State, they had a loss earlier in the season to BYU, another team that has had a roller coaster type of a season. So this was a game I don't know where to go at, like who to go on. I had Wyoming at first, pulling off an upset, but I've already predicted an upset here. I don't like trying to predict multiple upsets. So I'm going to take Boise State in this one. I just think home field for the Broncos is going to work out in their favor. I'm taking Boise State. Next, we have number 18 Iowa and number 16 Wisconsin. And this is a game I think can go in either direction. I expect a defensive battle in this matchup. Wisconsin, they haven't looked good in their last 2 games, and they're looking to get back on the winning side of things. But the Hawkeyes, they still got some season left. So I expect this to be a very low-scoring game. I don't expect either team to get more than 24 points. I expect it to be that low-scoring of a game. I'm going to pick the Badgers because I think their running game, I think being back home in Camp Randall is going to push the Badgers to a victory. I'm going to take the Badgers in this one by a score of 23 to 21. I think Wisconsin's defense is going to make a fourth down stop on Iowa's last drive of the game. And a matchup that I didn't think I'd predict in the preseason either, number 5 Penn State and number 13 Minnesota. Minnesota, they lobbied to try to get College Game Day to come to their town, and I'll give them credit. I think that College Game Day would have been there at Minnesota literally any other weekend. The only reason why Game Day's not at Minnesota is because number 1 LSU, number 2 Alabama. That's literally the only reason why Game Day's not in their town right now. Or at least going to be. But Minnesota's, their resume so far this season, despite being undefeated, they haven't really played any strong competition so far this season. And I would like to see Minnesota pull off a massive upset in this one to really cause chaos in the rankings for the upcoming weeks. But I just can't see it. I just think Penn State, they are potentially the third best team in college football at this point. I think the best teams in college football right now are LSU, Ohio State, and possibly even Penn State. You can make an argument for Penn State being either the third best team or simply staying them at the fourth or fifth. But I think Penn State, they will be able to compete with Ohio State really well once they play each other later on in the season. So I'm going to take Penn State in this one, and I think they win pretty significantly. I think with this being the toughest team Minnesota's played so far this season, I think Minnesota gets their reality check. I think it's just going to be a buzzsaw that Penn State's going to be. Very dynamic offense and a very stout defense. I think Penn State really blows out Minnesota in this one by at least 17 points. I'm taking the Nittany Lions in this one to remain undefeated. And finally, the game of the week. Not only the game of the week, but the game of the year. Number 1 LSU and number 2 Alabama. Major college football implications are on the line in this one. So right away, for Alabama, the status of quarterback Tua Tagovailoa is right now going to be a game-time decision via Nick Saban. Which I wouldn't buy that if I'm LSU. I wouldn't buy Tua. I think Tua's a lot healthier than what Nick Saban wants us to believe. And both these teams are coming off a bye week. But the thing that is sticking out to me at this point, Alabama, under Nick Saban, is 12-4 off of a bye week. But 3 of those 4 losses are against LSU. So that is a big factor in determining where I go with this game. Because this game, I'm hoping it's going to be an offensive shootout. I'm hoping for a lot of points in this one, because usually when it comes to this matchup, we see some great defense for a while, but we see Alabama pull away the later on the game goes. However, big loss for the LSU defense. Their sack leader, Michael Divinity, has been dismissed from the team for disciplinary reasons, but they're saying that it's personal reasons, according to Ed Ogeron. And also, some members of the LSU secondary, they did get banged up a little bit against Auburn. So that could be another big factor in this one. But I think coming off the bye week, I think everything's going to be fine. I think the loss of Divinity will be fine for LSU. I don't think it's going to really hurt them, but I don't know if it's going to help them either. And I don't necessarily think that it's going to have a major impact on the game in general. The way I look at it is, it's just hard to go against Nick Saban. Especially it's hard to go against him coming off a bye week with giving him more time to prepare to contain the LSU offense led by arguably the Heisman frontrunner right now in Joe Burrow. I'm going to pick the Crimson Tide in this one, but I think it's going to be a much closer game than anticipated. I think it's going to be the closest game that we've seen from LSU and Alabama since that epic 9-6 overtime victory for LSU. And then besides the one where A.J. McCarron leads the Crimson Tide to a game-winning touchdown drive, I think it's going to be the closest battle that we've seen between these two teams since that. So I think Alabama wins by a score in a high-scoring game. I'm going to say 45-41 in favor of the Crimson Tide. I think both offenses are going to have a field day with each other, but I think in the end, Nick Saban off a bye. 12-4 under Nick Saban is Alabama off a bye week. So that's going to be a huge difference. Crimson Tide 41, Tigers 41. So those are my Week 11 college football picks. Like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.